Have you ever been so invisible to someone that a single cruel remark cut deeper than any wound? In this story, a powerful CEO leans across the table and says, "She's efficient, but at least she doesn't distract anyone." Those words weren't meant for the boardroom. They were meant to crush his own assistant. But what happens when the woman he dismissed finally steps into her true power? When the tables turn and he's the one left desperate to be seen? Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next twist. Because this isn't just another office drama. This is a tale of ambition, betrayal, and a revelation that will leave you questioning. Who really holds the power? Stay with me until the end. You won't want to miss it. The 32nd floor of Caldwell Enterprises looked like a temple built for ambition. Glass walls glimmered in the morning light. Steel beams framed the skyline of downtown Chicago, and the air smelled faintly of espresso and polished leather. At the center of this kingdom sat a glass conference room where a dozen executives hunched over holographic charts, their laughter muffled by walls that were never meant to hide anything. Outside the transparent barrier stood Ngozi Chukwu, tablet pressed to her chest, her blazer buttoned so tightly she could feel the seam biting into her ribs. She checked the time again. 8:59. In 1 minute, the quarterly review would begin, and every calculation she had spent nights perfecting would pass through her boss's hands without her name attached. She reminded herself to breathe, but her pulse hammered as if warning her that something irreversible was about to happen. The doors slid open with a hiss, and Ethan Caldwell emerged. At 6'3", wearing a navy suit that looked sculpted rather than stitched, he carried himself with the kind of arrogance only money and victory could breed. His jaw was carved sharply, his eyes cold gray, his stride too controlled to be casual. People shifted when he walked, like waves parting for a ship. "Ms. Chukwu," he said, his voice clipped, polished, laced with a faint charm that always sounded rehearsed. She steadied her tone, refusing to let the nervous heat in her chest betray her. "The projections are uploaded, categorized by priority, and cross-checked with Q3 anomalies. The Henderson file is reorganized as requested. Environmental reports are synced with the cost analysis." His eyes barely flicked over her before snapping back to the phone in his palm. "Good. 2 syllables. Nothing more." And he was gone, swept back into the conference room where laughter roared at something she would never hear. She returned to her desk outside his corner office, a neat island of order in the storm of his empire. The hum of phones and the clicking of keyboards filled the air, but she moved through it like a ghost. Every email sorted, every call routed, every appointment adjusted with surgical precision. To everyone else, she was background, essential yet unseen, the invisible engine behind Ethan's carefully cultivated image of control. By noon, her best friend Kendra had texted, "Coffee? I need to vent about that disaster date." Ngozi's lips twitched into a smile, then faded as she typed, "Can't. Big meeting. Rain check." Seconds later, the reply came. "You work too hard. That man doesn't even know your name half the time." The truth in those words stung deeper than she wanted to admit. At 1:45, the executives spilled from the conference room, ties loosened, voices thick with satisfaction. Ethan came last, flanked by Harrison Webb from marketing, his laughter booming. When Harrison spotted her, his grin widened. "How does the lovely Ms. Chukwu keep our fearless leader so perfectly organized? I can barely handle my own calendar." Ethan's answer was low, almost swallowed by the noise, but clear enough for her ears alone. "Helps when you don't have to worry about distractions." The words landed like ice water poured straight into her chest. She froze, every nerve in her body lit with humiliation, yet her face did not falter. Harrison and the others moved on, oblivious, while Ethan's laughter echoed down the corridor. Ngozi held her posture, offered a polite nod, but inside she felt something snap. Invisible, dispensable, reduced to furniture with a pulse. She swallowed the fire, but a vow coiled in her gut. Never again. In the restroom mirror, her reflection stared back, pale under the harsh, fluorescent light. Her hands gripped the marble counter until her knuckles blanched. "Helps when you don't have to worry about distractions." The sentence replayed, cruel in its casualness. sharp in its precision. She straightened, smoothing her blazer, recalling her grandmother's words. Put on your armor, baby girl. Let the world see your strength, not your scars. The door opened, and Maria Torres from HR entered, heels tapping against the tile. Unlike most executives, Maria's smile reached her eyes. Perfect timing. I wanted to invite you to the Diversity and Mentorship Committee next week. We'd value your input. Ngozi inhaled, grounding herself. Of course. Send me the details. Maria tilted her head. You should consider applying for the communications manager opening. You're wasted as an assistant. For a moment, hope flickered across Ngozi's face, fragile but undeniable. I'll think about it. Maria squeezed her arm before leaving. Alone again, Ngozi studied her reflection. Maybe it was time to stop thinking and start acting. The afternoon dragged forward, but something inside her shifted. She no longer rushed to smile when Ethan walked by. Her replies were crisp, efficient, stripped of unnecessary warmth. At 4:15 he appeared, contracts in hand. I need these reviewed. Already done, she cut in, not looking up. They're on your desk. Recommended revisions highlighted. He blinked, momentarily thrown. She continued without pause. The Morrison presentation is uploaded. Confirmed for Thursday. Budget reports are compiled. Dinner reservation moved to 8 due to bridge traffic. For the first time he stopped and studied her. Is everything all right, Miss Chukwu? Her fingers never faltered on the keyboard. Everything is fine, Mr. Caldwell. Was there something else? The distance in her voice unsettled him, though he couldn't name why. No, that's all. He lingered another second, then retreated to his office, his confidence oddly shaken. That evening in her small apartment overlooking the river, Ngozi sat with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The lights of Chicago twinkled beyond the window, each one a reminder of lives larger than hers. Her laptop glowed with the job posting Maria had mentioned. Her phone buzzed again. Kendra. How was the day from hell? Ngozi typed back. Different. I think I'm done being invisible. After a pause. Finally. What changed? Ngozi stared at the screen, then whispered aloud as she typed. I remembered who I am when no one's watching. She hit send, closed the laptop, and leaned back in her chair, a faint smile tugging her lips. Somewhere deep inside, the wound still burned, but for the first time in months, she felt the embers of resolve. Tomorrow would not look like today. The next morning, the city's gray skyline was veiled in mist, the streets glistening with last night's rain, but Ngozi felt sharper than the damp air that clung to her. She walked into Caldwell Enterprises with her head high, her steps deliberate, the murmur of the lobby fading behind her. She had submitted her application for the communications manager position at dawn, fingers trembling not from doubt but from exhilaration. Now the decision was real, printed in black and white, lodged in the company's system beyond her control. As the elevator doors slid shut, her reflection stared back. The same sleek bun, the same navy suit. But the eyes were different, cooler, steadier, prepared for a fight. When she reached her desk, Ethan was already in his office, pacing while a call blasted from the speakerphone. His voice was clipped, commanding, but the edge of irritation bled through. He ended the call abruptly and stepped into the hall. Ms. Chukwu, he said, you'll cancel my lunch. I need time to review the Peterson numbers before the board follow-up. She didn't look up from her tablet. Already rescheduled. The updated agenda is in your inbox. His brow twitched, unused to her cutting him off. He adjusted his cufflinks as if regaining control. Efficient as always. She finally raised her gaze, her expression neutral but unyielding. That's my job, Mr. Caldwell. For a moment his jaw tightened as though he wanted to say more, but he retreated, the silence between them louder than words. By mid-morning, Maria Torres stopped by with a file tucked under her arm, her smile quick and encouraging. She leaned close to whisper, First round of interviews scheduled for Thursday. Keep calm. You've got this. Ngozi nodded, heart thudding, but before she could reply, Ethan appeared in the doorway. His voice carried a casual edge that fooled no one. Maria, to what do I owe the pleasure? Maria's tone stayed bright. Just a follow-up on some internal opportunities. Ethan's eyes flicked to Ngozi, sharp and probing. Opportunities can be distracting when people are already stretched thin. Maria didn't flinch. Growth keeps good employees. You should know that better than anyone. She left with a polite nod, but the message lingered like gunpowder in the air. Ethan's gaze held on Ngozi, and she refused to drop her own. Something unspoken crackled, an understanding that their balance had shifted. That afternoon, a minor storm broke. A client demanded immediate revisions to a contract Ethan had promised to finalize. The call came in while Ngozi was reviewing material for her interview, her notes scattered across the desk. Ethan strode out, phone pressed to his ear, his words sharp as knives. He thrust a folder toward her without breaking stride. "I need this cleaned up now. Send it before 2. She glanced at the clock, 1:15, and at her own schedule. Her interview prep session with HR began at 1:30. For an instant, panic rose, but she forced it down. This was the test, the choice between staying the invisible protector of his empire or daring to build her own. She met his eyes and spoke evenly. "I'll deliver it at 2:30. I have a prior commitment." His frown was immediate. "I wasn't aware your commitments outranked client contracts." She straightened, her voice steel. "They do today." Without waiting for permission, she gathered her notes and walked away, leaving him momentarily stunned, the hum of the office filling the void her defiance left behind. The interview prep was tense, but her answers gained strength with each question. She spoke about authentic communication strategies, about bridging corporate image with community trust, about turning narratives into connections. She felt alive, each word peeling away the armor she had worn for too long. When she returned to her desk at 2:25, she dove into the revisions with ferocity, and by 2:45, the document was sent. Ethan emerged moments later, scanning the updates. His face was unreadable, his voice flat. "You cut it close." She didn't flinch. "The work is solid." Their eyes locked, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Days bled into nights until the company retreat arrived, held at a secluded lakeside resort. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and the sound of water lapping against the dock whispered under the hum of executives trading jokes. Ngozi walked through the lobby with a clipboard, her checklist complete, her posture upright. She wore a simple dress instead of her usual suit, and though modest, it framed her presence differently, commanding without effort. Harrison Webb spotted her first, raising his glass. "Ms. Chukwu, you've outdone yourself. This weekend looks flawless." She smiled politely, but her attention shifted to the sound of laughter near the terrace. Ethan stood surrounded by board members, his charm dialed high, his expression polished. For once, she felt no urge to shrink beside his glow. Later at the poolside gathering, sunlight spilled gold across the water. Executives lounged with drinks, conversations rising and falling like waves. Ngozi slipped away from the crowd, only to hear raised voices near the bar. A guest complained sharply about missing accommodations, frustration threatening to sour the evening. Without hesitation, Ngozi stepped in. Her tone was calm yet authoritative, her gestures measured. She listened, offered solutions, and arranged adjustments with staff in minutes. The tension melted, replaced with gratitude. People nearby watched, impressed not just by efficiency but by the poise she radiated. When the guest finally shook her hand in thanks, Harrison clapped lightly. "See, Caldwell? That's how you defuse a bomb." Ethan's eyes had been fixed on her the entire time, his usual detachment cracked by something raw, recognition. She felt his gaze as she moved back toward the water, the night air cool on her skin. Colleagues drifted closer, eager to engage, their laughter surrounding her like a circle of warmth she had never been allowed before. She responded with ease, her voice carrying confidence that once hid beneath silence. Across the pool, Ethan stood alone for a moment, a shadow among the glow of lanterns, his jaw set, his glass untouched. He had always believed he controlled the room. Tonight, the room no longer revolved around him. It revolved around her. The lake still smelled of wet pine when morning broke over the resort, but the warmth of last night's applause had already cooled into office weather. Measured smiles, guarded glances, invisible ledgers tallying who owned what power. Ngozi stood on the terrace with a mug of black tea warming her hands while the sun widened across the water, and she cataloged the day like a strategist. A planning session at 9, an ops huddle at 10:30, and an impromptu roundtable Ethan had added at noon without asking who would carry the weight of it. When he approached with that slow, deliberate stride, the ceramic in her grip felt fragile. He gestured toward the conference pavilion and said, "I'll want you at my side for all sessions today. Keep the chatter with other directors to a minimum. Focus is everything." She held his gaze and answered, "My focus is on doing my job, not narrowing my circle." He let out a breath that sounded like a laugh but wasn't, then added, "You've been busy this week. I'd hate for ambition to cloud execution." She felt the old heat crawl toward her throat, yet she kept her voice even as she replied, "Execution is the reason I can afford to be ambitious." He studied her a beat too long, as if testing whether pressure might force her back into the box he'd built. But she didn't flinch, so he pivoted hard and walked away with a clipped, "See you in the pavilion." The morning session turned into a field of tripwires, supply chain friction, a bruised vendor, an ops slide that contradicted finance, and Ethan deflected scrutiny with a practiced charm that used to impress her, though now it looked like choreography. She watched him redirect a critique toward logistics and felt the room tilt because he never stepped in front of bullets unless he controlled the gun. When the COO asked for a comms plan on a potential delay, Ethan said, "My assistant will draft the talking points by the end of the day." And she felt a dozen eyes slide across the table toward her, while he kept his trained smile pointed at the problem. She answered before anyone else did, saying, "Happy to propose language in partnership with communications. The audience impact warrants their lead." And the COO nodded while Ethan's jaw flexed like a hinge catching on rust. Harrison cleared his throat and joked, "Look at that. 2 leaders for the price of one?" And the laughter skimmed the surface of something sharp until it snagged on a different tone from the far end. A senior manager leaned back and said, "As long as she keeps it professional this time, I'm sure the board won't be distracted." And the line came slick with insinuation that made the air feel colder. The scrape of metal on stone echoed as Ethan pushed his chair back, and his voice cut clean through the room when he said, "We don't tolerate personal remarks about anyone on my team. Apologize." The manager smirked like a man daring a storm to touch him, but the CFO spoke first, flat as steel. "Apologize now." And the man muttered the word without looking at Ngozi, while she kept her spine straight and her face unreadable, because dignity was armor, and she refused to let their pettiness scratch it. By lunch, the sky had turned a polished blue, the lake a sheet of glass reflecting a world that looked calm only from a distance, and she walked the path between pines to reset her pulse before the roundtable. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Interview slate finalized for Thursday. Panel wants your POV on crisis storytelling." She typed back, "On it," then tucked the phone away as footsteps crunched the gravel behind her, steady and unhurried. Ethan joined her without asking, hands in his pockets, voice low enough to hide from the wind as he said, "What happened in there was out of line. It won't happen again." She answered, "It happened because people learn what's safe to say by watching who you protect." And the truth of it hung between them like cold air. He stared at the water and said, "I've protected this company every day since I took the chair." And the words sounded like a man reading a plaque about himself. She said, "You protect what you value. If you valued respect, you'd defend it before someone's dignity is on the floor." And his shoulders tightened because the shot landed. He turned then, eyes cooling, voice clipped. "Are you implying I don't value you?" And she replied, "I'm saying you value control. Those are not the same thing." Something flickered across his face. Surprise or warning, she couldn't tell. Yet before the silence hardened into a wall, Harrison's voice carried from up the trail with a careless cheer, and the moment fractured into noise as the afternoon reset like a script page turning too fast. The round table packed itself with competing egos and thin patience. So the air grew heavy with corporate perfume and performative agreement, and every second felt like work against a riptide. When the final agenda item died, people spread toward the bar, their laughter rising with the clink of ice, and Ngozi headed for the corridor that led backstage because quiet was safety when the room ran on pretense. She was almost through the service door when she heard a voice behind her. casual and leering, saying, "Hey, Ms. Calm and Collected, I see why the CEO keeps you close." And she stopped so fast that the corridor narrowed to a point. She turned to face the senior manager from earlier, his tie loosened, his grin sloppy, his eyes hunting for confirmation that she would play along. She felt the familiar pulse of fury push against her ribs, but she chose precision over explosion, answering, "Careful, you're about to confuse a hostile work environment with humor," and the grin faltered as his gaze flicked past her shoulder. Ethan's reflection appeared in the window first, then the man himself, jaw set, voice controlled when he said, "You're done for the day. Hand in your badge at HR when we return." And the manager's bravado evaporated into stumbling protests about jokes and misunderstandings that died under the CFO's sudden arrival, and quiet, lethal, "I heard enough." The hallway exhaled when he left, yet the sound of it didn't soothe, because Ngozi knew defense delivered late was still a tax on the person who paid for it, and she didn't owe gratitude for what should have been ordinary decency. Night fell with a clean, star-pricked darkness, the lake gone to shadow, and the lodge windows glowing like a string of low flames. And the noise of celebration spilled across the patio, even as something in Ethan's orbit went quiet. He stood alone near the railing, a glass in hand. He didn't drink. The music folded in on itself until it became a hum against the one voice he wanted to ignore. And he finally walked the pathway to his room as if it might hold a simpler answer than the one crowding his head. The suite felt staged when he opened the door, precise lighting, two tailored jackets on a valet stand, the city's most expensive silence, pretending to be comfort. And he set the untouched drink down, tugged his tie loose, then pulled his phone from his pocket like a man reaching for a lighthouse. He stared at the screen longer than made sense before pressing the call button for the number he never ignored. And his mother's voice arrived full of warmth and gravity as she said, "Hey, baby, what's wrong?" He paced to the window and watched his reflection fracture in the glass while he answered, "I think I've been cruel without knowing it. I think I've built a company on precision and missed the most human thing inside it." And the words tasted like metal. She let him talk, let him confess the line he had thrown like a dart months ago. The way he had used competence as a leash, the sight of a woman holding a room with grace, he had mistaken for decoration. And when he ran out of language, she said, "If you can name it, you can change it. If you love her, prove it without asking her to pay for your repairs." He closed his eyes because the sentence struck bone, and he whispered, "I don't know how to start without turning it into another performance." And she answered, "Start by stepping back where your shadow doesn't block her sun. Then speak when you've surrendered the power to make it easy." The call ended with the kind of silence that doesn't accuse but insists, and he stood in it until the night pressed close. Then he sat on the edge of the bed like a man who had finally found the bottom of his pride. And he stayed there as the music downstairs dissolved into the dark. By dawn, the resort had softened under a pale mist again, the water dim and patient, the corridor's muscle memory quiet, and Ngozi walked them with a new steadiness lodged under her ribs, because fear had spent itself and left clarity where panic used to live. She was not naive about consequences, nor romantic about apologies, and she carried the certainty that her worth didn't hinge on whether a powerful man learned her name without notes. When she reached the lobby, Maria was waiting with two coffees and a smile that looked like solidarity instead of pity, and she handed over the cup while saying, "Panel moved up. Thursday morning, first slot. You ready to be seen?" Ngozi took the coffee, let the heat travel into her fingers, and answered, "I was ready the moment I stopped asking for permission." And Maria's nod felt like a door opening. Across the room, Ethan paused by the elevator, his eyes finding hers without the old assumption of claim, and she watched him incline his head in a quiet acknowledgement that didn't ask for anything in return, then step back as if the room belonged to her path first. The day would summon new tests, but the shape of the fight had changed, and she knew where she was headed, even if he only knew where to begin. Friday crept in under a slate sky, and the 32nd floor wore its usual armor, glass bright as ice, air chilled by recycled confidence, the scent of espresso fighting the tang of printer toner. Yet everything felt different because endings make ordinary rooms look like stages. Ngozi reached her desk at 8, her box already half packed. A framed photo of her family, a succulent with two stubborn new leaves, a white mug that read, "Nevertheless," she persisted, and she touched the rim once as if steadying herself before a long dive. Ethan's office door stood ajar, shadows pooling across the carpet, his silhouette motionless against the window, as if the city were waiting for him to move. And when he finally turned, he carried nothing but a porcelain cup and the quiet of a man who had rehearsed and thrown the script away. He set the cup on her desk carefully, steam drifting up with the soft-spoken insistence of bergamot, and he said, "Earl Grey, splash of oat milk, no sweetener," while she felt the detail hit harder than apology because it sounded like attention. He didn't reach for permission, and he didn't command. He stood there as if distance were respect, then added, "I signed the HR release for your internal transfer, and I've recused myself from every stage of the review. Any influence I had is off the table." She felt a flicker of gratitude cut through the wall she had built, yet she kept her voice firm as she answered, "Thank you for stepping back. I won't trade one cage for another." And he nodded as if the line were a promise he intended to keep, rather than a dare he wanted to win. By 9:30, the executive conference room was bright enough to make secret squint. The board gathered in a crescent of leather and glass, and a looming client delay had turned the agenda into a live wire that nobody wanted to touch first. The COO asked for messaging, finance asked for timing, legal asked for caution, and for a breathless beat, the air felt like a throat clearing that never ended. Ethan stood, not in front of the room but beside it, his hands at his sides, his gaze steady on the table rather than the spotlight, and he said, "Communications will lead. Ms. Chukwu will present a framework for stakeholder alignment," while half the faces tipped toward him as if waiting for the old choreography to snap back into place. It didn't. He gestured to Ngozi, seeded the floor without crowding it, and the room shifted around her as if the center had been quietly redrawn, because power notices when it's invited to move. She rose, pulse ironed, flat by purpose, and walked to the display where her deck waited like a fuse wired to proof. She spoke in clean strokes about timelines and temperature, about internal empathy and external clarity, about shifting a narrative from defense to candor, and when legal raised a brow, she folded risk buffers into the phrasing without blunting the spine. Then when finance asked about market reaction, she mapped out a series of controlled disclosures that turned panic into predictability. She didn't look at Ethan because she didn't need his reaction to calibrate her own, and when the CFO said, "This is precise and principled," the room seemed to exhale. Then Harrison added with an uncharacteristically sober nod, "It's leadership." Ethan cleared his throat, landed on the words like a man choosing humility on purpose, and said, "Credit where it belongs. This is Miss Chukwu's design." And the sentence landed the way an apology should, public and unqualified. So the old hierarchy cracked with a sound only the careful could hear. The crack became a test before the applause could settle, because the operations feed blinked red on the side screen. A real-time alert announcing a shipment snag that would compound the delay unless someone moved faster than procedure. And the room fluttered with talk that pretended to be action while seconds burned like dry brush. Ngozi didn't wait for a blessing. She pivoted to the auxiliary screen, opened a live channel with the regional dock manager, and said, "You have a sympathetic audience, but I need facts I can weaponize," while fingers flew across her tablet as she reconciled manifests with contingency routes she had prepped for a what if no one else had wanted to imagine. The dock manager laid out a tangle of weather, staffing, and one stubborn customs check. She cut the tangle into lanes, resequenced the loads, and paired the highest value pallets with the clearest corridor. Then she pulled the comms plan forward and said, "We'll own the delay, not excuse it. We'll publish a transparent window with buffer, and we'll call top accounts before they see the blast." And when the manager hesitated, she anchored him with, "I'll be the name on the memo if it misses, but it won't," which adjusted his spine as cleanly as a hand to the back. The board watched the choreography that wasn't vanity, the kind of visible competence that erases doubt. And when the alert went amber, then yellow, the CO murmured, "That just saved 7 figures and a week of reputational drag," while Ethan said nothing because pride didn't need a narrator. After the meeting, people spilled into the corridor with the murmur that follows controlled fire. and Maria arrived with eyes bright and a folder held like an envelope for a future, whispering, "Panel results at noon Monday, but off the record, you landed the plane." And Ngozi smiled the kind of smile that felt earned rather than borrowed. Ethan remained near the doorway, quieter than she had ever seen him in public, and when the space thinned, he stepped closer, but not close enough to claim. Then he spoke without theater as he said, "I was wrong, not just in words but in the architecture I built around you. I wanted your steadiness, and I mistook possession for protection. I don't anymore." And she heard no plea, only a line he needed to draw for himself, so she answered, "Seeing me is not a favor, it's the standard." And the sentence didn't wound. It calibrated. He nodded and replied, "Then let me meet it," which wasn't a conquest but a course correction. And for the first time, she believed the correction might hold. 6 months later, the city had traded winter steel for summer heat haze, and Caldwell's auditorium was dressed for an investor forum that sparkled like a promise, the stage washed in white light, the back of house alive with the thrum of mics testing and clips snapping, and in the center of it all stood Ngozi, now communications manager, wearing a burgundy blazer that sharpened her presence rather than softened it. Her team fanned around her with the choreography of trust, cue cards marked, live dashboard humming, and as the live stream's counter ticked towards zero, she felt the old armor fall away because she wasn't borrowing a room anymore. She was building it. The campaign she had designed had already pushed brand favorability up and volatility down. And now the final reveal, an initiative linking supplier transparency to community grants, would either nail the arc or wobble it. So she breathed once through the diaphragm and walked on stage when the producer lifted 2 fingers. The presentation moved like a river with banks, honest, paced, edged with backbone. And when questions came sharp, she welcomed them, answered with frameworks rather than fluff, and handed wins to teammates by name so that the light widened rather than narrowed. Near the wings, Ethan watched with a posture he had learned the hard way, hands loose, shoulders unbraced, attention forward. And when the applause rose, it did so from a place deeper than good optics because the room knew the difference between surfaces and substance. Backstage afterward, the air tasted like relief and warm cables, and people queued to congratulate without crowding. Then the queue thinned until it was just the two of them, standing among cases and coiled cords, the noise of teardown ringing like rain on metal. He spoke first, no theatrics, simply, "You made this company braver." And she answered, "I made it honest." Brave was optional, and they both smiled because definitions mattered. He hesitated for a heartbeat, not to choose a mask, but to safeguard the line, and said, "There's a table at 7 North that keeps a corner booth open for the impossible. If you're free tonight, I'd like to sit there and ask questions I should have asked a year ago." And he kept his hands at his sides so that the question could be itself instead of a demand wearing cologne. She considered the offer the way she had learned to measure risk, head high, heart present, boundaries visible. And she said, "I won't trade the work for the wine," which earned a soft laugh and a quick, "Then we'll order badly and talk well." And something about the exchange felt like a door opening without hinges squealing. She didn't say yes and she didn't say no. She let the possibility breathe, then she added, 7:30, and the clock inside both of them moved forward a click that wasn't fate, only choice. When she walked back through the lobby, the afternoon sun threw coins of light across the marble. The receptionist waved with relief that looked like pride, and the city outside hummed with the identical certainty of traffic and reinvention. While upstairs, a mug sat on a desk with a chip along the rim, and a plant leaned toward a window it knew by now, and everything ordinary felt strangely lit because dignity turns common objects into evidence. The story was not a coronation, and it was not a rescue. It was a realignment that had cost both of them their easiest lies. And as the doors slid open to the street, Gozi stepped into the warmth, knowing that whatever waited at 7 North would not decide her value. It would only meet it. The sky held its blue like a vow that meant nothing without action, and she walked toward evening with the calm of someone who had already chosen herself. Thank you for staying with us through this journey of ambition, respect, and second chances. What do you think? Should Ngozi allow Ethan to prove himself, Or should she keep walking her own path without looking back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Until then, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.